In the golden age of Hollywood, some rivalries were the stuff of legend. You had Bette Davis versus Joan Crawford. Olivia de Havilland against her own sister, Joan Fontaine. These were epic feuds, fought right out in the open, in the headlines and on the studio lots, but there was another rivalry, or what everyone thought was a rivalry. This one was quieter, a Cold War fought with deafening silence that lasted for over 3 decades. On one side, you had William Boyd. He wasn't just an actor, he was a global phenomenon, the smiling, fatherly hero known to millions of kids as Hopalong Cassidy. On the other side was the tall, stoic, and intensely private Randolph Scott, the ultimate man of the West whose rugged dignity made him a box office titan. They were the two undisputed kings of the Western, their careers running side by side, their shadows falling over the exact same cinematic landscape. And yet, in all those years, not a single public word was ever spoken between them. No praise. No trash talk. Just nothing. This total silence fueled decades of speculation. Was it some bitter, unspoken feud over who was the bigger star? A professional jealousy so deep it couldn't be said out loud? Or was it something else entirely? For years, the mystery just hung in the air. The running assumption in Hollywood was simple: where there's silence, there's conflict. But now, by piecing together the lives these men actually lived and understanding the principles they held dear, we can finally reveal the truth behind that silence. And it's a story far more complex and fascinating than any made-up feud. It turns out the silence wasn't about hate. The silence was the message. To really get the weight of this silence, you first have to understand just how huge these two were. In the 1930s and 40s, the Western wasn't just another genre, it was the lifeblood of Hollywood. It was America's mythology played out on dusty streets and across sun-drenched canyons. And at the center of it all were Boyd and Scott, two titans ruling over separate, but equally powerful, kingdoms. First up, William Boyd. It's almost impossible to overstate the cultural force that was Hopalong Cassidy. But the man who became a moral compass for a generation of kids had a surprisingly rocky start. Born in Ohio and raised in Oklahoma, Boyd hit Hollywood in the late 1910s. With his rugged looks and striking, prematurely white hair, he was a hit in the silent era, a favorite of the legendary director Cecil B. DeMille. But his career almost got completely derailed. Another actor, also named William Boyd, got caught up in a massive party scandal. In the confusion, our William Boyd was mistakenly identified in the papers. The accusation was false, but in the studio system, where morality clauses could kill a career, the damage was done. Roles just dried up. His A-list stardom started to fizzle. Then, in 1935, he got a lifeline. A producer named Harry "Pop" Sherman was casting a series of westerns based on some pulp novels. The main character was Hopalong Cassidy. In the books, Cassidy was a rough, hard-drinking, foul-mouthed cowboy who limped from an old bullet wound. Boyd, now 40 and with his options narrowing, was originally up for a sidekick role but fought hard for the lead. He got the part, but on one crucial condition: the character had to be completely reinvented. Boyd's Hopalong Cassidy would be the exact opposite of the guy in the books. He wouldn't smoke, swear, or touch alcohol, famously preferring sarsaparilla instead. He was a gentleman, a man of pure integrity, a fatherly figure in his iconic all-black outfit, riding his magnificent white horse, Topper. And the public fell in love, instantly. From 1935 to 1948, Boyd made 66 Hopalong Cassidy films. He wasn't just playing a hero, he was becoming one. He knew the power of the character and guarded it fiercely. He was Hoppy, and Hoppy was him. Running on a parallel track was the formidable Randolph Scott. If Boyd was the friendly, smiling father of the West, Scott was its stoic, unreadable soul. Born into a wealthy Virginia family, Scott was the picture of Southern gentility. He was tall, handsome, and athletic, with an easy charm and a southern drawl. After a stint in his father's accounting firm, he took off for Hollywood with a letter of introduction to Howard Hughes. Like Boyd, he caught Cecil B. DeMille's eye. By the early 1930s, he had a contract with Paramount and was quickly cast as a Western hero in a popular series of films based on Zane Grey novels. But Scott wasn't just a cowboy. He was a versatile leading man, showing up in musicals with Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers and comedies with Cary Grant. Still, it was the Western that would define him. From the mid-1940s on, almost all of his films were Westerns. His on-screen persona became the classic, strong, silent hero. He was a man of few words, but his moral compass and sheer presence were never in doubt. He didn't need big speeches, he just had to show up. From 1950 to 1953, he was consistently ranked as a top 10 box office star, proof of his quiet, immense popularity. So, the stage was set. Two men, both giants of the same genre, both beloved by the public, both working at the same studio, Paramount, for a time. Their careers were so linked that the Statler brothers immortalized them together in their 1974 hit, Whatever Happened to Randolph Scott, a song that longed for a bygone era of clear-cut heroes, an era that Boyd and Scott had built. They were forever connected, two sides of the same heroic coin. Which only made the silence between them all the more puzzling. Why, in a town built on backpatting and backstabbing, did these two act like the other didn't exist? For decades, the complete lack of any comment between William Boyd and Randolph Scott was like a blank canvas, and Hollywood was more than happy to paint its own theories on it. In an industry that runs on gossip, a vacuum this perfect just had to mean something. The most popular theory, the one that became a kind of myth, was that of a silent, bitter rivalry. It was a juicy story, and if you looked at the circumstantial evidence, it almost made sense. So where does this story of a Cold War even start? Well, you have to go back to the studio that housed them both, Paramount Pictures. In the mid-1930s, Randolph Scott was the star of a successful series of westerns based on Zane Grey's novels. They were popular, and they made money. But then came Hopalong Cassidy. When Boyd's first Hoppy films became a runaway smash hit, Paramount had a choice to make. According to industry insiders, the studio decided that the Hopalong Cassidy series, with its family-friendly appeal, was a more attractive vehicle than Scott's films. You can just imagine the friction this might have caused. Were they fighting for the same resources? The best scripts, the best directors, the best release dates? In the dog-eat-dog world of the studio system, being seen as the second banana, even to a massive hit like Hopalong Cassidy, could easily stir up some resentment. It's not a stretch to think that Scott, the proud Virginian, might have felt a little slighted as the studio shifted its attention to the Man in Black. Beyond studio politics, their public images were fundamentally different. William Boyd wasn't just an actor, he was a brand manager. He understood the power of a squeaky clean image, maybe better than anyone. Hopalong Cassidy was a symbol of unerring virtue, a moral guide for kids. Boyd protected this image with everything he had, refusing to endorse any products he thought were wrong for his audience and dodging any hint of personal scandal. Randolph Scott, on the other hand, was a different kind of Western hero. His characters were often more complicated, more stoic, and aimed at adults. Scott's heroes were always men of integrity, but they could be loners, wrestling with a dark past. They lived in a morally grayer world than Hoppy's black and white universe. Did Boyd see Scott's more adult westerns as a threat to his clean brand? Did Scott see Boyd's genial, public persona as phony? It's easy to picture a scenario where they silently disapproved of each other's entire approach to the genre, and then there's just good old-fashioned professional jealousy. As time went on, their careers went in wildly different directions. William Boyd's big bet on Hopalong Cassidy paid off beyond anyone's wildest dreams. When the B-Western movie craze started to fade in the late 40s, Boyd did something incredibly risky. He sold or mortgaged almost everything he owned to buy the complete rights to the Hopalong Cassidy character and all 66 of his films. He then took them to the brand new medium of television. On June 24, 1949, Hopalong Cassidy became the first network Western TV series, and it was an absolute phenomenon. Boyd became one of TV's first superstars and a merchandising king. The Wall Street Journal in 1950 called him the greatest godsend for anyone selling stuff to kids. There were Hopalong Cassidy lunchboxes, the first ever to feature a character's image, which caused sales to jump from 50,000 to 600,000 a year, plus watches, comic books, and roller skates. In 1950 alone, Hoppy merchandise pulled in over $70 million. Boyd became a very rich man. While Boyd was becoming a business icon, Randolph Scott was forging a different legacy. He went from being a reliable B-movie hero to the star of a series of critically acclaimed, psychologically deep westerns in the 1950s, many with the great director Bud Boetticher. His career peaked with the 1962 masterpiece, Ride the High Country, a film many call one of the greatest westerns ever made. So, could Scott, the serious actor, have looked down on Boyd's commercialism? And could Boyd, the pop culture icon, have envied the critical respect Scott received later in life? These theories are all plausible. They fit the Hollywood playbook perfectly. For decades, film buffs searched for the smoking gun, a letter, a diary entry, a third-hand story of a fight. And for decades, they found nothing. Not one co-star ever recalled a tense moment. Not one director ever mentioned a conflict. The silence was absolute. And that, as it turns out, is the most important clue of all. In a town where secrets have the shelf life of milk, the fact that there's no evidence of a feud points to a hidden truth. Before we finally reveal the surprising truth behind Hollywood's quietest relationship, if you're enjoying this dive into the untold stories of the Golden Age, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You won't want to miss the classic Hollywood histories we have coming up. For all the speculation over the years, the truth of the matter is much quieter than some explosive, long-lost quote. The real story is that the silence itself was the statement. It wasn't a sign of a rivalry, but a sign of a deeply held, unspoken code of mutual respect. These were two men who understood the Hollywood machine and deliberately chose to stay out of its noisiest gears. To get to the truth, you have to look again at William Boyd, not just as an actor, but as a brilliant businessman. His transformation into Hopalong Cassidy was absolute. It wasn't just a role, it was a reinvention. After his career was nearly destroyed by mistaken identity, Boyd knew how fragile a public image could be. When he got a second chance with Hoppy, he clung to it. He didn't just play Hopalong Cassidy. In the public eye, he was him. This was a smart business decision. By 1948, Boyd owned all the rights to the character. He controlled Hopalong Cassidy Enterprises. Every lunchbox, every comic book, every TV broadcast made money for the company he ran. Any public feud or negative comment would have been brand suicide. It would have tarnished the pure gold image he had so carefully built and monetized. His silence on Randolph Scott, and really, on any controversial topic, wasn't personal. It was the move of a shrewd CEO protecting his most valuable asset. William Boyd lived by his character's code because it was the smartest thing he could do. Engaging in a public spat would have been cheap, tacky, and worst of all, bad for business. Now, let's turn to Randolph Scott. If Boyd's silence was strategic, Scott's was just who he was. By all accounts, he was one of the most private and reserved men to ever become a major Hollywood star. While Boyd was cultivating a warm, public persona, Scott was building a fortress of privacy around his life. He came from a well-to-do Southern family and carried himself with a gentleman's distaste for public drama. He almost never gave interviews and actively dodged the Hollywood party scene. This wasn't an act. His close friends were guys like Fred Astaire and Cary Grant, and those friendships were kept intensely private, far away from any cameras. He was also an incredibly smart investor, quietly becoming one of the wealthiest actors in Hollywood. A man this private and this financially independent just didn't need the kind of publicity that feuds generate. His silence wasn't a snub aimed at William Boyd, it was his default setting for pretty much everyone. The less he said, the less of his private self he had to give away. Right there, in the space between Boyd's strategic silence and Scott's natural privacy, is the real relationship. It wasn't a rivalry. It wasn't a friendship. It was a quiet, dignified, and unspoken understanding between two absolute professionals. They were two kings who ruled different parts of the same vast kingdom. Boyd was the king of the kids, the master of merchandising and the new world of television. Scott was the king of the adult Western, the master of stoic integrity and cinematic art. There was no need for conflict because they weren't really after the same crown. In fact, Paramount favoring the Hoppy series probably helped both of them in the long run. It let Boyd corner his unique market, and it freed Scott to eventually move on from B-movies and chase the more complex roles that would define his legacy. They had their own lanes, and they were both masters of their domain. The myth of a silent feud only started because their non-relationship was so unusual. In a Hollywood that runs on drama, the absence of drama becomes its own mystery. People couldn't imagine two men of their stature sharing a genre without some kind of conflict, so they just invented one. The final proof is in what was never found. In all the years since, not a single credible source has ever come forward with a story of a real fight. Not a crew member, not a fellow actor, not a family member. According to one account, Boyd did finally shed some light on it late in his life. He supposedly said that his silence was never about animosity, but about a mutual need to preserve the private dignity both men cherished. He reportedly described Scott as a man of few words, but a man whose words carried weight. Boyd is even said to have defended Scott's intense privacy, stating that a man who lived with grace and decency didn't owe the world an explanation for his life. Whether those exact quotes are real or not, they perfectly capture the truth that their lives and careers suggest. The silence was the bond. It was a gentleman's agreement, an unspoken pact of mutual respect. They were two of the last true cowboys, in a sense, men whose word, and whose silence, was their bond. They understood each other perfectly, without ever needing to say a thing. So, the great untold story of William Boyd and Randolph Scott wasn't the bitter rivalry everyone imagined, but something far rarer and more admirable. Those decades of silence weren't the sound of a Cold War, but the quiet hum of professional respect. This wasn't a feud, it was a dignified peace treaty between two empires that had no reason to go to war. The myth was about conflict, but the reality was about character. William Boyd became Hopalong Cassidy, a beacon of simple, unwavering goodness for millions. He knew his legacy was tied to that ideal, and he lived his life to serve it, creating a business empire built on trust. His silence was a shield, protecting the hero that kids and their parents had come to believe in. His legacy isn't just in the films or the TV show, it's in the lunchboxes and on the playgrounds, in the very idea that a hero should be someone you can look up to. Randolph Scott's legacy is carved in a different kind of stone. He was the classic Western stoic, an actor who could say more with a single glance than most could with a page of dialogue. His later films are now studied as masterpieces of the genre, lean, tough, and psychologically complex. He was an artist who chose the Western as his canvas. His silence was his armor, protecting a private life he valued more than fame. He left behind a body of work that speaks for itself and the memory of a man who walked through the chaos of Hollywood with a quiet, unshakable integrity. In an era famous for its loud, headline-grabbing feuds, the kind we're still obsessed with today, the story of Boyd and Scott stands apart. It's a testament to a different kind of Hollywood and a different kind of star. They didn't need to trade insults in the press to prove their importance. Their work, and the honorable way they lived their lives, was more than enough. The final word on their relationship isn't a word at all. It's the quiet respect that flowed between their parallel paths. They were two gentlemen of the West who, as Boyd reportedly said, rode for the brand. One rode for the brand of Hopalong Cassidy, a symbol of youthful idealism. The other rode for the brand of Randolph Scott, a symbol of mature, quiet strength. Their real story reminds us that sometimes, the most powerful statements are the ones never spoken, and the greatest legends are often the quietest men. What do you think? Does this change?